The Nintendo Switch. I think it's finally time. People have been hammering on and on about how doomed Nintendo is for over a decade now, but it's never come to fruition. But I think for the very first time, I have to agree with them.
Not so fast, mister.
Oh hey Arlo, how do you just know when I'm talking about subjects like this?
It's scripted, Ninny.
That would explain it. So why are you here?
I've been a Nintendo fan all my life. 20-some-odd years of experiencing firsthand some of the finest stuff gaming has to offer. Now, I'll be the first to admit that Nintendo has made plenty of mistakes, big ones even, but they'll always have a spot in my heart, and as such, when someone, especially a friend, starts falling down the road of Nintendoom, I must hastily bring forth my defense.
Oh.
That, and I was wondering if I could borrow $20.
Nintendo is doomed.
No, they are not, and here's why. One system where you can play Nintendo games wherever you want, on a TV or on the go, is exactly what Nintendo needs. Honestly, the Switch is what the Wii U should have been, if possible. Think about it, the dedicated handheld market is shrinking more and more thanks to mobile devices. Why would a parent want to buy another expensive toy when they can just hand their kid their cell phone, or even get them one for school? And also, in order to play every Nintendo game, you'd have to own both their home console and their handheld of the time. Now it's just one purchase for both, and all their games play on a single device.
Which actually may end up hurting it.
Was it?
Think about, for instance, how many people actually use the 3D on their 3DSs. Poll after poll shows that the majority of people don't use the 3D feature at all, meaning that gimmick on the 3DS is only making the system cost substantially more. The same can apply to the Switch. What if someone only wants a handheld or only wants a console? The Switch screen will never leave its little dock and ultimately only make the system cost more for that person. And of course, the additional cost deters more people from picking one up early, if at all.
Valid point, but what of all the more people who will replace and outnumber them because of the gimmick?
Right, which is why I'm not totally on the Nintendo is doomed side of things. Rather, I just like being aware that this is a massive risk that will either destroy Nintendo or save them. Really, I'm just exaggerating my Nintendo is doomed stance for the sake of this video. And speaking of it being a risk, ooh, boy is it. The Wii U, of course, did miserably. The 3DS did pretty great. So now Nintendo is putting all of their eggs in one basket, hoping it will turn out to be another 3DS. But the chance that it turns into another Wii U is still there. So will the Switch bolster up Nintendo's console side, or hinder its handheld side? We don't know yet. And before anyone brings up that Nintendo has stated that the Switch will not replace the 3DS, remember, they also said the same thing about the Wii U, that it would not replace the Wii U, and then months later said otherwise. They also said that the DS was going to be more of a companion to the Game Boy Advance rather than a replacement. And look where that ended up. Speaking of these handhelds, let's talk about the transition from the 3DS to the Switch. The Switch, being more expensive than just a handheld, will hinder households with siblings. If it costs too much, then no longer will parents buy each of their children a handheld, meaning no longer can they all play different games at the same time. And sure, having Pokemon on a system will push sales, but let's save games for last. I worry that not enough people will jump on board soon enough, because they may worry that Nintendo will just release a Switch Lite or Switch upgraded console in a year or two, like they did with the 3DS. And kind of what Sony and Microsoft are doing with their consoles now. Speaking of which, the PS4 Pro is coming out soon, before the Switch's release, and the Xbox Scorpio is coming out later the same year. Not to mention the Switch is completely missing the holiday season.
Though releasing decently between the two may be the better idea, as to not directly compete with the other new consoles.
True. So let's move on to the next point, the power. Based on what we know, based on a few dev kit leaks that may or may not be true, but even if you ignore those, what we know for certain about its specs so far, and the reveal trailer and such, we are looking at a slight graphical upgrade from the Wii U. Slight. There are rumors about it being as strong as an Xbox One, but as per usual, the internet is full of dummies.
But aren't we just more dummies on the internet?
Yeah, but at the very least, I majored in computer science, and at least have a slight bit of knowledge on the topic, and am not just being an overly defensive fanboy or overly hateful troll. Or a YouTuber talking about a subject they know nothing about for views.
Harsh.
So as powerful as an Xbox One? While it's not very hard to do since the Xbone's chip layout is laughable, no, it's still not. Though admittedly, we don't know all of the details yet. I mean, the Switch is basically an upgraded NVIDIA Shield K1, and it's been confirmed that the dock it sits on is for charging and outputting to the TV. There is no extra processor or anything in there, meaning all of the power of the Switch is in a device slightly larger than your average 7-inch tablet. Do you really honestly think that you could cram an entire Xbox One and the massive battery it would need to be mobile for longer than an hour inside that tiny space? No! I mean, yes you could, but it would overheat like mad and cost thousands of dollars. Like, we have the technology to do that. It's just way too expensive. So slightly more powerful than a Wii U looks a lot more like it. And that's just when it's docked. We can assume that it will work like a laptop. When it's plugged in, it doesn't have to worry about battery power, so it goes full force. But when on the go, it performs less well in order to save power and heat. With the built-in screen being off when docked, it can also save a lot of heat. Heat that it will need to save, because we can assume that rather than having an extra processor in the dock, the built-in processor will just clock higher when docked, like a laptop. So for example, while docked it could play games at 1080p 60fps with full graphical settings, but when on the go, it will drive down to 720p 30fps and reduce some graphical settings. Meaning while mobile, the Switch likely will have less power than the Wii U.
Yeah, but does graphical power even matter anymore? Back in the day, each new console would leap forward in terms of graphics, but lately the jump is less and less. People are really just starting to care more and more about the gameplay. People want games that are fun instead of the most photorealistic experience. As long as the game is fun, and at least HD, it meets their needs. We've been asking Nintendo for a basic console with no gimmicks for a while now, and I feel like that's what this is. At least a balance of that and a gimmick. That's if you even consider this a gimmick. It's the perfect combo of something new with a plain focus on great games.
I wish I could agree with you, Arlo.
You don't?
Well, I do. While graphics are important, I'd take a fun game with decent graphics over a decent game with fantastic graphics any day. So yes, I agree with you. In fact, I'm sure most of the people watching this video and everyone here agrees with you. But the problem is, we are not the majority. Month after month, it gets proven again and again that most people, casuals you could say, do care about graphics primarily. The game of course still has to be decent, but by their standards. But as long as something looks fantastic and realistic, it will sell well. If this wasn't the case, then the Wii U would not have been a failure, and modern console wars wouldn't be a thing. It may be sad, but the majority of gamers get into arguments over whose console can play Battlefield and Madden with the most polish. It seems like we always wonder how games like Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Call of Duty, Battlefield, etc. do so well, despite all of us constantly bashing on them and pointing out how they are getting worse and worse, and more the same. The only thing really going for them is that they are looking better and better. And the answer is, it's just that. They are looking better and better. And thus, in the eyes of casuals, as much as I hate that term, that's all they apparently want. That's why these games do the best. So if the Switch isn't powerful enough to even be a contender in these arguments over graphics, then most of these people won't even consider getting one. Unless they have kids, of course. But even then, they could just let their kids use the console they already have for their own games, or give them a tablet for cheaper. In our eyes, and even the eyes of most of the people watching this video, Nintendo may have done the perfect thing for us. But we are not the majority. The majority want really great-looking multi-platform games, and third-party support has been a Nintendo problem for generations.
But did you see that list of third-party developers they're working with on the Switch?
I did, but Nintendo said the same thing about the Wii U, and look how that turned out. Plenty of third-party support at the beginning, but those developers soon learned it wasn't worth it. The Wii U didn't sell well enough, so they didn't want to spend the money to make the ports. We can look at the PS3 for an example of this, actually. When the PlayStation 3 was first launched, its chipset was built so differently from the Xbox 360's that it was a huge pain for developers to port anything from the Xbox to the PlayStation. And so, a ton of developers didn't bother doing so. This created the PlayStation has no games meme back in the day. But because the PS3 was a good bit more powerful than the Xbox 360, and it had more new features like Blu-ray and such, it gave people plenty of incentives to get it. Eventually, it sold enough and had a big enough part of the market share that it was worth the time to figure out how to port games to it, and thus began the major console war over whose port looks and runs the best. But with the Wii U, this never happened. It was hard to develop for because of its odd chipset, it was a generation behind in terms of power, it had the weird tablet thing, and more. But worst of all, it didn't have a significant place in market share. It sold abysmally, and so it was not at all worth the extra effort to make ports or even games for it. And I just worry that the same thing will happen to the Switch. Just like the Wii U, it's the weakest of the bunch. And just like the Wii U and PlayStation 3, it has a very strange chipset from the rest of the market. And so I worry that just like the Wii U, it will have decent third-party support at first, but they will realize that it's not worth the trouble because it didn't sell well enough.
Which is why Nintendo needs to get off their high horse and provide more incentives like much cheaper virtual console games, or a free virtual console game every month, or even just a collection of free ones with the Switch. The NES and SNES sold amazingly, and nostalgia for those games is high. I do not want to live in a world where the NES Classic will outsell the Wii U or Switch. All Nintendo has to do is provide enough incentives in not only the form of their high-quality games as always, but also go above and beyond to grab people's attention and wants early. If the Switch sells well in its first year, then Nintendo is saved. But if not, then they've put all their eggs in one basket and let it fall to the floor. But I have faith that that won't happen. A new Smash Bros., the new Zelda, and a new Pokémon will eventually push systems. And this seems to be the perfect system for anyone who has ever considered themselves a fan of Nintendo. Even if they skip the Wii and Wii U, this might be the system to come back to, which is why it for sure will do better than the Wii U.
But that might not be enough, and with the lack of a fantastically selling handheld to boost up the failing of the Switch, Nintendo may actually fall. And I want to stress again, I'm not saying that it will fall. People have been saying that of Nintendo for over a decade. And most of these people are people who want Nintendo to go the way of Sega, failing as a console manufacturer and for them to start making games on systems they already have. But I don't want that. I'm a huge supporter of Nintendo. But it's good to be aware and not a blind fanboy. The Switch is a massive risk. A risk that will either be the final nail in the coffin or the map to El Dorado. So what are your thoughts?
What? You already know my thoughts.
I'm talking to the audience.
Oh. Well, if you want to hear more on this topic, I have a more detailed video on my thoughts right here.
Will you be getting a Switch at launch, or wait and see how it does? Or does it just not interest you in the least, and everything in between? Let me know down below, or on my Twitter, @Lockstin.
Ooh, I've got one too, @Arlo Stuff.
Arlo, that was fun.
Yep. So, about that $20.
What do you need $20 for?
Oh, well, there's this pie eating contest down in Burbank, and it costs $10 to get in.
Oh, that sounds fun. What about the other 10?
Oh, I just need new socks.